Fast story. Growing up, I always noticed the disparity in how my parents treated me and my younger brother Ryan. He was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Every soccer game, every school play, every little achievement of his was met with fanfare and applause. My milestones, on the other hand, were often overlooked, overshadowed by yet another event for Ryan. I still remember the day of my high school graduation. It was one of the proudest moments of my life. As I scanned the crowd for my parents, my heart sank. They weren't there. Instead, they were at Ryan's basketball tournament. When I confronted them later, my mom waved it off. "You know how important this game was for Ryan," she said dismissively. "We'll celebrate your graduation later." But later never came. The pattern continued into adulthood. When I landed my first job, they barely acknowledged it. When I bought my first car, Ryan's college acceptance took center stage. I learned to stop expecting validation from them, focusing instead on building a life for myself. When I met Ethan, everything changed. He was kind, supportive, and saw me in a way my parents never had. He celebrated my successes, big or small, and encouraged me to dream bigger. After 3 years of dating, he proposed. It was a quiet, intimate moment, just the two of us, and I knew I wanted to keep it that way. The decision to exclude my parents from my wedding wasn't made out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I couldn't bear the thought of them overshadowing my day with yet another excuse or Ryan-centric moment. So Ethan and I planned a small ceremony with close friends, and only those who had truly been there for us. The wedding was perfect. A serene beach setting, vows exchanged under the golden sunset, and a reception filled with laughter and love. For once, I felt like the star of my own story. It wasn't until weeks later that my parents found out. A distant cousin, who had seen photos on social media, let it slip during a family gathering. The fallout was immediate. My phone was flooded with messages and missed calls from my parents, all demanding an explanation. "Why didn't you tell us?" My mother cried when I finally answered. "Because I didn't think you'd care," I said honestly. "You've missed every other important moment in my life. Why would this be any different?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then my father spoke, his voice low and trembling. "You really think that little of us?" "It's not what I think," I replied, my voice steady. "It's what you've shown me over the years." What followed was a flurry of blame and defensiveness. My mother accused me of being selfish, of punishing them unfairly. My father tried to justify their actions, insisting they had done their best, but their words rang hollow. As the weeks passed, the news of their exclusion spread through our family. Relatives began to take sides, and the cracks in my parents' marriage became impossible to ignore. My mother blamed my father for not being more involved while he accused her of enabling Ryan's favoritism. Their once united front began to crumble under the weight of their guilt and shame. One day Ryan called me. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his tone softer than I expected. "It wasn't about you, Ryan," I said. Though part of me wondered if that was entirely true. I just needed a day that was mine. Ryan sighed. "I'm sorry, for everything. I didn't realize how much it affected you." His apology caught me off guard. For the first time, I felt a flicker of understanding between us. As for my parents, they continued to struggle. They started attending therapy, both individually and as a couple, in an attempt to mend their fractured relationship and understand the choices they had made. Months later, my mother showed up at my door, her face lined with regret. "Can we talk?" she asked. We sat in my living room, the silence between us heavy. Then she said, "I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much we hurt you. I thought I was doing what was best for Ryan, but I see now that I failed you." Her words, though late, carried a weight that lifted something inside me. "I just wanted to matter," I said, tears streaming down my face. "You do matter," she whispered, reaching for my hand. "And I'm so sorry it took me this long to show you." It wasn't an easy road, but it was a start. My parents' marriage remained rocky, and their relationship with me was far from perfect. But they were trying, and for the first time, I felt like they truly saw me. Second story. The sound of laughter and applause echoed in my memories. But it wasn't for me. Growing up, the spotlight always seemed to shine on my younger brother, Jason. He was the golden boy, the star athlete, the class president, the one my parents doted on endlessly. Meanwhile, my accomplishments were treated as an afterthought. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, my parents missed the ceremony because Jason had a championship game. "You know how important this is for Jason," my mom said when I asked why they weren't there. The sting of her words stayed with me, replaying in my mind as I gave my speech to a sea of unfamiliar faces. When I landed my first job at a prestigious firm, they barely acknowledged it, too busy celebrating Jason's acceptance into medical school. And when I bought my first home, they didn't even visit, claiming they were too busy helping Jason move into his new apartment. Over the years, I learned to lower my expectations, focusing instead on building a life for myself. My parents weren't going to celebrate me, but I didn't need their validation. Or at least that's what I told myself. Then I met Adam. He was everything I had ever hoped for: kind, supportive, and deeply in love with me, with him. I felt seen in a way I never had before. After 3 years together, he proposed, and for the first time in my life, I had something truly mine. As I started planning the wedding, a familiar fear crept in. I imagined my parents missing my big day for one of Jason's milestones, or turning the celebration into yet another ode to him. The thought was unbearable, so I made a decision. I wouldn't tell them. It wasn't an act of revenge, but a quiet rebellion. A way to reclaim something for myself. Adam supported my choice, though he gently asked if I was sure. I was. Our wedding was small and intimate, held in a picturesque garden surrounded by close friends and Adam's family. As I walked down the aisle, I felt a mixture of joy and sadness. Joy for this new chapter with Adam, and sadness for the absence of the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The day was perfect. For once, I was the center of attention, surrounded by people who truly cared. It wasn't until weeks later that the secret came out. A distant relative who had seen wedding photos online mentioned it to my parents at a family gathering. The fallout was immediate. The phone call started that same night. My mom's voice trembled with anger when I finally answered. "How could you get married without telling us?" "Because I didn't think you'd care," I replied. My voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "You've missed every other important moment in my life. Why would my wedding be any different?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line before she spoke again, her voice breaking. "You really believe that?" "I don't believe it," I said. "I know it." The conversation spiraled into accusations and blame. My father accused me of being petty, while my mother tearfully insisted they had done their best. But their words rang hollow. As the news spread, so did the shame. Relatives began questioning my parents, wondering why they hadn't been at my wedding. Jason, too, began to see the cracks in their golden family narrative. He called me guilt-heavy in his voice. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Because it wasn't about you, Jason," I said, though I couldn't entirely suppress the bitterness. For once, I needed something that wasn't overshadowed by you. To my surprise, he apologized. "I never realized how much it hurt you. I'm sorry. I should have done better too." His words were unexpected, but they didn't erase years of neglect. Meanwhile, my parents' marriage began to crumble. The shame of being excluded from their own daughter's wedding was too much to bear, and it forced them to confront years of favoritism and neglect. My father blamed my mother for prioritizing Jason over me while she accused him of being emotionally absent. Therapy sessions turned into shouting matches, and soon, they were living in separate rooms. Months later, my mom showed up at my door, her face etched with regret. "Can we talk?" she asked. We sat in my living room, the tension between us palpable. Then, with tears in her eyes, she said, "I'm sorry. I failed you, and I see that now. I thought I was doing what was best for Jason, but I didn't realize how much I was hurting you." Her apology was years late, but it carried the weight of her realization. "I just wanted to matter," I said, my voice breaking. "You always mattered," she whispered. "I'm so sorry it took me this long to show you. It wasn't an instant fix, but it was a start." My parents' marriage ultimately ended. But the divorce wasn't just about me. It was the culmination of years of unresolved issues, favoritism, and neglect. Through it all, I learned that love and validation don't always come from the places we expect. Sometimes they come from within or from the people who choose to show up for us, like Adam and the friends who stood by me. While my relationship with my parents remains complicated, I found peace in knowing I reclaimed my story. My wedding, though unconventional in its secrecy, was a turning point, a moment where I chose myself.